So at least in Finland, the party which has been always most pro-nuclear has been kind of like a right-wing party. So there was this tribalism going on that if you're in the left or in the Greens, you're supposed to be against. And if you're on the right, then you're supposed to be for nuclear. People didn't really analyze why they are against and why they are for. So there's a lot of tribalism in play as well. And the thing is that people think that there's risks to using nuclear, but they forget that there's risks for not using nuclear. So you always have to take that into account. So what if we don't use nuclear? How many people will die then? And we know this because if you prematurely close down a nuclear plant, that has led to more coal and gas, and we know that's going to have real life health consequences to people. So when you compare this risk, then it's really obvious that using nuclear is a lot less risky than not using nuclear energy. There's a lot of this idea going around that you should be suffering, you should make some kind of sacrifice. And if you're not making a sacrifice for nature, then you're not a proper environmentalist. So there's this element of sacrificing that needs to be there. And if we just go on with our lives, not really changing anything, but we just replace everything with cleaner options, then that's not a sacrifice. So for example, regarding nuclear energy, I've heard someone say that it's like giving a lollipop to a child. It's too easy. So then again, there's this need for sacrificing. So if you're just having loads of clean energy and you don't have to save energy, you don't have to turn your lights off, and then it's not a sacrifice, it's too easy.
Welcome to Saving the World from Bad Ideas. I'm Mark Lynas, and I've had a few bad ideas in my time. I used to go out in the nighttime to destroy GMO crops, and I also opposed nuclear power. But then when I looked at the science, I found I got it wrong. Oops! I've learned the hard way that none of us are right all the time. So now I'm here to challenge the assumptions that we all too often take for granted, because the future depends on us getting it right. Tea Törmänen, very pleased to have you on our Saving the World from Bad Ideas podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the bad idea that you're saving the world from, which is that Greens, green parties, green politicians, green environmentalists cannot support nuclear power. And this is kind of your life story. So we've got a lot to get through. And given that I already know you and I've known you for years, I can say this fairly confidently. You have an incredible life story and you've done some pretty amazing things. And you're one of the most interesting people I've ever had the pleasure to meet. So we are going to really enjoy hearing a bit more about you. But just to get right into the bad idea, what is it about nuclear power which somehow Greens have a problem with? And I could give you my answer, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, there's a lot of history to it. I mean, the threat of nuclear war is definitely one part of it. I think radiation also just scares people in general, and people don't understand it. They cannot put it into perspective. It's really difficult to compare radiation levels. So people think that even the tiniest amount of radiation is really, really dangerous. So I think there's a lot of reasons to it. Also, because it's a very polarized topic. So at least in Finland, the party which has been always most pro-nuclear has been kind of like a right-wing party. So there was this tribalism going on that if you're in the left or in the Greens, you're supposed to be against. And if you're on the right, then you're supposed to be for nuclear. People didn't really analyze why they are against and why they are for. So there's a lot of tribalism in play as well. I was never against nuclear, so I was kind of in between, but I was always an environmentalist. So it was very difficult for me at one point because I felt like I didn't belong in any of these groups.
I've always been an environmentalist as well. And I guess I was anti-nuclear up until about 2005 or thereabouts, maybe a bit later. But not because I thought about it or done, scientific research or something. It was just that it was in the DNA of the environmental movement. And you can see that with the origin story of many of the groups. I mean, Friends of the Earth, for example, was founded, I believe, as a breakaway from the Sierra Club, which was another big American NGO, because the Sierra Club wasn't anti-nuclear enough. And by anti-nuclear, I mean anti-nuclear power, not anti-nuclear weapons. And you can see this even in the history of Greenpeace, which was founded originally to campaign against nuclear weapons tests, I think off Alaska, actually. But then, then they got on to saving the whales, and Then they pivoted onto opposing nuclear power and stopped talking about nuclear weapons, which in any kind of logical scenario you think is bizarre, because which is really more of a threat to survival of species or of human civilization, like the thousands of nuclear missiles which are ready to get explode and give us nuclear war and a nuclear winter, or a few reactors which can, at the absolute worst case scenario, release a bit of radiation into a local area. So it doesn't make any sense, but it's something which has been there for so long that it's become part of the DNA of the environmental movement. It's almost it's an identity issue, right?
To me, a lot of the environmentalists aren't even that aggressive against fossil fuels. So I know many environmentalists who are happy to drive a gasoline car. They don't like electric cars. They're really happy to drive a diesel car or gasoline car, and they don't mind, and they don't think that's horrible. But if you're a nuclear energy supporter, then that's absolutely terrible. So it's very weird, because we know that fossil fuels are definitely bad for the climate and the environment, but a lot of the environmentalists are not putting that much effort into being against fossil fuels. They're not as aggressive about it. They're not as black and white about it as they are about nuclear energy. And I find that really, really interesting. And to me, it never made sense, but for them, obviously, it does.
Yeah, I think there's some psychology here, and I can't remember who originally did this work, but there's kind of a matrix of different technologies which have a sort of dread factor attached to them.
Yeah.
And I think nuclear pretty much goes at the top right. And
yeah, I think fossil fuels feel more natural.
Right, exactly.
For some reason.
Yeah, it's just like the old anti-nuclear, the singers used to sing, give me a log fire, don't give me a horrible reactor, So it's something to do with the homeliness and the kind of the approachability and the sense of control, and this idea that you'd have these nuclear engineers who are either idiots like Homer Simpson, or they're somehow this kind of priesthood who are totally out of any kind of control of society, who are just doing this strange thing up on the hill in this weird looking dome. And it's just, I can see why it's inherently scary, but these are also really outdated tropes now, and what's weird perhaps is that they just continue to resonate. I mean, and you can see this when the technology goes wrong, like in Fukushima or Chernobyl. I mean, it makes, Chernobyl had that great long documentary on one of the streaming platforms, and the drama of it, all these people dying and stuff like that. But actually, what the true history of Chernobyl is very different, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we had a professor in one of our events who's been studying the animal population in that area, and it's one of the most thriving natural conservation areas right now because of the absence of humans. So yeah, it's very interesting, and so I'm into wolves, as you know, and there's a very thriving wolf population in the Chernobyl area right now. So it's interesting that humans are more detrimental to animal populations than the worst nuclear energy disaster we've had.
That's exactly right. I mean, I've been to Chernobyl. I was there before the war filming with Channel 4. And what struck me most was, as you say, it just felt like it was a nature park, nature reserve. It was just thriving. It was humming with life. And it was amazing how all these trees and how nature was reclaiming it. All these trees were growing up through the buildings. And to some people, this is like a kind of horrific wasteland. But actually, for me, it was a magnificent view of rewilding. And we had dosimeters, so we could tell that there were some areas which had relatively high residual radiation still. But it just goes to show that even high levels of radiation are much better for nature than just normal human occupation. So that's of course why, in macro scale, why biodiversity is in crisis all around the world. Let's talk a bit about Finland. There was a minister who will remain nameless, who someone was telling us about, this was in the UK actually, about how in Sweden they do this, and this, and he just banged the table and said, Sweden is not a real country. And I feel in some ways people feel the same way about Finland as in all of these sort of Scandinavian countries, that they do these crazy things. They've got sort of systems which support people and which are a bit socialist, and they have reasonably high tax rates, and everyone's really happy. And I'm sure it's not really like that, but you seem to have arrived in a fairly smart place with nuclear, at least, and with your approach to energy. So tell me how this whole story played out in Finland from the beginning.
Yeah, so historically, the situation is very similar to other countries. So like I said, we had the right-wing party being pro-nuclear and the left's and the Center Party as well. So in the 90s, it was actually the Center Party that blocked a lot of the new nuclear projects, and we stopped building new nuclear in Finland. Yeah, it was very divided. It was very political. But then there was a lot of things going on at the same time. So the national organization WePlaneteer Finland, we call it now, it used to be the Eco-Modernist Society of Finland, was founded in 2015. And even before this, there was this kind of a club within the Greens that was formed called the Greens for Science and Technology. And among these people, a few started to question the stance of the Greens against nuclear. And so together with all these people who started to question this approach, we started to push nuclear as an environmental organization. I was the chair for 4 years in Finland. So we was the first environmental movement in Finland to be pro-nuclear, and we started to challenge.
Sorry to interrupt, but I want to get to the very beginning of this. Like, who first said in a meeting, "Wait a minute, we might have got nuclear wrong"? Or what was the process? Do you know, or do you remember, like, who it was, or what the first spark came from?
Yeah, so in the Greens, there was a ex-leader of the Greens, Osmo Soininvaara. So there are a few prominent figures in the Greens who said that, the climate crisis is getting really serious. I think we should reconsider. And at the same time, there's these science Greens within the Green Party who started to question this. And also, the Greens in Finland are a very democratic party, so it's really easy to change the positions of the party. And also, they decided, I wasn't in the Greens at the time, they decided that they should have a civilized discussion about this topic. So we know from other countries that if you're in a Green Party and you say that you support nuclear, you get a big pushback. You get people calling you names. You get just horrible feedback. And so people don't want to do it. So the leadership of the Green Party said that, we need to have a civilized discussion about this. Everyone's going to be appreciated no matter what they think about this topic. So we're going to have a proper debate about this topic. So the discussion culture within the party was very important. And then as the Eco-Modernist Society of Finland, we started talking to other environmental groups. We started going to climate marches with some nuclear signs. And at the first climate march we went to, this was, I think, in 2015, we got some negative feedback. But then the following ones were a lot easier. So we met with the Green Youth, for example.
What kind of negative feedback? Because I think the first thing I did was write a piece for the New Statesman in the UK, which is this left-wing magazine. Straight away, I got email from people who were environmentalist friends of mine who I'd known from protests saying, "I can't believe you've done this. Something must be wrong with you." And literally, because I was living in Oxford and a lot of my friends were like in the Green councillors, I'd even been invited to be a Green Party candidate myself. And literally at parties, people were walking away, they were crossing the road. It felt like a real ostracism. So like, you must have had some of that when you were starting to question the sort of ideology, which is really deep-seated for the first time, right? It can't have been that easy.
Finns in general, luckily, are very calm people. So I think there was this one aggressive man who was very anti-nuclear, who was really saying that you shouldn't be here, you don't belong here, not really against climate crisis, you're not supporting the real solutions. And of course, he thought that that's renewables and only renewables. But then we had very good discussions with the Green Youth, for example. And in addition to the science Greens, the Green Youth were actually a movement within the Greens who started to push a more positive stance to nuclear. So it was these first discussions we started having, and they started to have an effect. Also, we were in very close contact with people in Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, talking to them about the benefits of nuclear energy. And so neither of these movements in Finland never became anti-nuclear. So from the start, they didn't really have a stance on nuclear, but we continued to have discussions with them. And then just a few years later, they came out being pro-nuclear. So, for example, when Greta said that nuclear shouldn't be in the taxonomy, then the Finnish Fridays for Future said that nuclear absolutely should be in the taxonomy.
Tell us, what do you mean? What's the taxonomy that you're referring to?
So the taxonomy for sustainable investments in the EU. So there's a huge debate about whether nuclear energy should be eligible for this kind of funding.
Greta Thunberg in Sweden, who's the founder of Fridays for Future and obviously very well known, said nuclear should not be included in the sustainable financing taxonomy in the EU. And the Fridays for Future chapter in Finland pushed back on that.
Yes. So they made a public statement and they published that on their website. And that was very brave of them, because I know they got a lot of negative feedback within the Fridays for Future community, very aggressive feedback.
Wow, and the same for Extinction Rebellion. I mean, again, I've known them in the UK context, which is where it started, and I've not. Yeah, I mean, the nuclear thing was, you see, you would logically expect that the people who are most alarmed by the gravity of the climate crisis and think that we are the last generation, as it's called in Germany, or that there's no future for our kids or anything like that, they would be the ones who would be saying yes to every single low carbon option, including nuclear,
and even climate
despite what happened in the past. But somehow it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, even geoengineering potentially. Anything to cool the planet down would, might be their motto, but it doesn't seem to be that way. They seem to have a certain group of solutions which are the ones that they consider to be permissible, and everything else is a false solution and has to be opposed with, very strongly. And how did those lines originally get drawn?
That's very interesting, because I've seen similar things when it comes to the things we eat. So there's a lot of vegans who think that we shouldn't eat meat replacement. That's a wrong solution. That's a false solution. So we should all just be eating beans and tofu and whatnot. So they reject these technological solutions, even though they might help us to reach a goal earlier. I think it's kind of like a Puritan thing that it's part of your identity to be an environmentalist, and then you start putting things into it that belong to that identity, and these are the technologies that are good and pure, and then some others are not. So then it becomes more about that identity than what actually works.
Yeah, somehow the pragmatic options are rejected, aren't they? Because of the, there's something it's not virtue signaling, but there's something about needing to feel virtuous and needing to feel that you're.
Yeah, and I also think there's a lot of this idea going around that you should be suffering, you should make some kind of sacrifice, and if you're not making a sacrifice for nature, then you're not a proper environmentalist. So there's this element of sacrificing that needs to be there, and if we just go on with our lives, not really changing anything, but we just replace everything with cleaner options, then that's not a sacrifice. So then you're doing it wrong.
I think I should try and find someone to have a proper conversation with about this. But I think it's like, because I don't know much about it, but I think it's such a Judeo-Christian type notion, isn't it? This idea of sacrificing for a better world or something. You've got to somehow expunge your sinfulness to attain the kingdom of heaven, it would be. But I think these notions are still very prevalent culturally, aren't they? And I think they really do form the origin of a lot of environmentalist thinking as well, even if it's notionally not to do with God, right?
So, for example, regarding nuclear energy, I've heard someone say that it's like giving a lollipop to a child. It's too easy. So then again, there's this need for sacrificing. So if you're just having loads of clean energy and you don't have to save energy, you don't have to turn your lights off, and then it's not a sacrifice. It's too easy. So it's wrong.
Yeah, and I think this comes up with the degrowth movement as well. And I get emails from people who read my book saying, you talk about these options and pragmatic ways, but if we don't stop economic growth and we don't stop using too much of the earth, and then we'll never solve these problems. They'll just create more problems. And I know what they mean, but at the same time, it's a very hopeless type perspective, because just to try to insist on impossible measures to deal with something which actually is a relatively soluble problem is a way of not solving it.
Yeah, and I'm always curious. I always want to know what their solution is to make it happen happen in a democratic society. How do you actually enforce, for example, like having so you'd have like quotas, and you can have just this much, of clothes, or you can fly only like once in 10 years, and you can have apartment. There's like a square meter size, like how big that can be? How do you make that happen in a democratic society? How do the politicians making these decisions get reelected? How do you solve that? And I've never heard a solution so far. They just say that we need to do this, but I'm like, okay, but how? How are we going to do this in a democratic society? It's going to be impossible. And I've even read a paper, like a scientific paper, that calculated like how much space would like each individual get if we would just distribute it evenly across the globe. And even those scientists said that we have no idea how we actually implement this. Like we can calculate this, but we have no idea how to actually do this, like how to make it happen. So even the scientists are saying like we don't know. And of course you can do that by taxation. You can have demands for recycling. Those are the things you can do, but just having those type of quotas, that's going to be very, very difficult.
Right. So anyway, let's get back to the nuclear topic and investigate a bit more in a bit more deeply about why it's a bad idea for Greens to say no to nuclear. Obviously, the conventional environmentalist thinking on this has been that I suppose there's two main objections, right? Maybe you can correct me if I'm getting the wrong ones, but I would say waste. So this idea that we're leaving this long-lived radioactive waste for future generations to deal with, and that there's no solution to it, and so on. And also maybe the radiation thing, that's the danger of accidents. I remember seeing some anti-nuclear groups saying we could sterilize half the country if one of these things blows up and it would be uninhabitable forever. So this notion that the nuclear accident from a reactor really is a sort of mini apocalypse. And therefore it's just unthinkable to use this as an energy source. Do you think those are the two main ones, or are there other big objections as well, which you frequently hear?
Yeah, I think those two. And also I think what I hear in Finland is that then you would have too much energy and too much of consumption. So that would lead to extra consumption if we had this 24/7 unlimited energy. Then
so
that
your
would
solution is just too good. It shouldn't be allowed, right? That's too much carbon-free power. We must ban it because
and then there's the fact that they think that investing in nuclear would mean that we wouldn't be investing in renewables.
But why does that matter? I mean, if they're both doing the job, why does that matter?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
And it's not even true, as we know. I mean, Finland is a great example that you can invest in both.
Okay. Well, let's look at these. I mean, we might call them bad ideas, but let's look at them in a bit more detail. So the waste thing. How have you dealt with that both as kind of a discourse, so a conversation topic, and in a sort of real policy engineering technical sense?
Yeah, so nuclear waste is not a technical problem, it's not a scientific problem, it's a political problem. And in Finland, we've been able to solve this. So we are just about to finish the world's first final repository, because even when the Greens were against nuclear, they thought that, well, we're producing this waste, so we must take care of it. We just can't postpone this solution to next generations. So we got into agreement across the political parties, locals in the area where they decided to build this. They also wanted to, so they had an option to opt out. So I think that's very important. So they could genuinely choose whether they want the final repository or not. They wanted it because it does bring jobs. And the Finnish bedrock is excellent for final repositories. Personally, I don't think we need final repositories. We should just recycle and reuse the waste. So hopefully we'll get there before we actually seal the final repository and we can just use all this waste. But I think it stopped the conversation about waste in Finland. So in that way, it was a really good thing that we reached the solution. So in Finland, we've never had any issues with nuclear waste. This is true for like all the countries basically in the world. So nuclear waste hasn't killed anyone. It hasn't caused nuclear waste from nuclear reactors hasn't caused any huge environmental problems.
In Finland or anywhere in the world? What do you mean?
Anywhere in the world, I don't know any huge natural disasters. So compared to other types of waste that we have, it's very well taken care of. So for me, it was, as an environmentalist, it was never a problem. It's so well managed and it's regulated, and the nuclear, it's required that you save, like when the nuclear companies, they have to save for handling the waste, save money for handling the waste. So there's just lots of money in Europe for this purpose. So it's very well maintained. And like I said, it can be even reused. So we could, if the price of uranium was much higher than it's now, like it could be financially feasible to reuse it in breeding reactors. So it's also fuel for the future.
Yeah, let's look at that a bit more technically. How does recycling nuclear waste work? Does this make it go away? I mean, can all of it be recycled and reused? And if not, do you still have waste left over at the end? I mean, what's the plan to do this?
I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's you can't like completely I mean, there's nothing you can recycle 100%. I think that's true for anything, but most of it, there's a huge amount of energy still left in that waste, so you could use it. So the tiny bit that it's left, then maybe we can put that in the final repository, and that will mean that we will need much less of those. But you would have to have reactors that can use the waste. So the current reactors we have in Finland, for example, are not suitable for that. But the technology exists, so you could build reactors that can reuse waste.
I mean, you might remember, but I did a report on this, actually looking at I think it was looking at various countries in Europe. But I remember for the UK, if you take all of the spent fuel that we've got sitting around in cooling ponds and in these big casks, because most of the uranium's still there, like over 90%, I think. If you were to feed that into a new generation, so not the same kind of light water reactors we've got now, but a new generation of fast reactors, which breed their own fuel, plus kick in there's 100 tons of plutonium that the UK is about to throw away, which is insane, because this is probably the best fuel there is. But if you were to put all that together, you could run the whole of the UK at current electricity consumption levels for I think it was a couple of thousand years. It was a really long time anyway, certainly enough time to deal with global warming. So in some ways, the fact that there's never been this understanding of just how much fuel there is out there is one of the things which has fueled, I think, anti-nuclear thinking that somehow uranium will run out next. It'll be just like oil and gas and coal. That it's such a limited resource. I mean, of course, it is limited in a physical sense, but there's a lot of it out there. And if we were to reuse the existing spent nuclear fuel, it's literally thousands and thousands of years worth that we already know about. Not to mention thorium and other kinds of opportunities as well. So has that, why has that not happened? I mean, there's been fast reactors around the world, but they seem to have all been shut down. And is it just because uranium's too cheap?
Yeah, I think it's just for financial reasons that there's no incentive to build those reactors right now.
And
I think that's the most common explanation I hear from experts.
So your deep repository you're building in Finland, hopefully you will be able to get down there and reuse the stuff if you want to. It's not like permanently sealed off, is it?
Well, the plan is to permanently seal it, but it's I mean, because we're going to gather a lot of waste there, so it's going to be a very long time until it's sealed. So hopefully, before that happens, then we would have a breeder reactor that could reuse that. Because I just think just burying it's waste. It's wasteful because we could be reusing it.
It's a waste of waste, isn't it? So
yeah.
What could be more wrong than that?
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't there a proposal even to take in nuclear waste or spent nuclear fuel from other countries as well and help solve their problems with your repository?
Yeah. So we've started this discussion in Finland. It's a good example of how things can change in a very short period of time, because just 5 years ago, people told us that you can't even, say that out loud, that that's going to be terrible. But now we've said it out loud, and it hasn't been terrible. But there's a law put in place when Finland joined the EU that we cannot import nuclear waste. I think there was a deal, like a political deal, so that we can join. Because people were afraid that we'd start importing nuclear waste from other countries when joining the EU. So this was put there. I think we need to reevaluate our stance on that, because we do have the first repository, and like the EU taxonomy rules say that nuclear is not eligible for funding under the taxonomy unless it has a solution for the waste, a final repository being built or something like that. So Finland could help countries with no solution yet to get funding for the nuclear project if they did agreement between governments that, okay, we're going to take care of your waste. And it would be a huge business for Finland, of course, but if it would also help the EU as a whole to meet its climate targets. So I think that would be a very good idea. That wouldn't be a bad idea.
And have the anti-nuclear legacy Greens, have they said anything about this? I mean, even in Finland, do they accept, well, right, well done, you guys, you've actually solved the problem, now we're going to have to talk about something else? Or do they say, no, it's still unsolved for these reasons? What's the view?
Yeah, but the waste discussion, it's mostly disappeared. So there's still a few people, but it's not the main reason anyone is opposing nuclear. Right now, the main reasons right now are that it's slow, it's expensive, and reasons like that. But nuclear waste is not really mentioned as a reason to oppose nuclear waste. Of course, there's always, like, there are some people who they never have enough guarantees. So they always think that, maybe if something happens and, something still can happen with the waste. And I always point out the research that Posiva, the companies building the repository, they have risk assessment, and it's just ridiculous amount of things should be going wrong. That, I mean, and then you would have to eat it or something. It's very, like, you would have to dig in there and and eat the waste, and it's not going to happen. And
the risk matrix on the whole nuclear waste thing has always really irritated me, and I think the industry has always got it wrong in terms of just for comms reasons. I mean, this idea that you have to somehow safeguard it for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or even like a million years, I think it is in the UK, just so that some human a million years hence, if they were drinking like 1,000 liters a day from a well which happened to have been accidentally sunk down into the nuclear waste repository, they would have more than like a 0.5% chance of getting cancer if there was 1,000. It's just insane.
Exactly.
Compared to the threat to the biosphere posed by global climate change.
Yeah, exactly. You shouldn't be using so much money to safeguard for that scenario, but that's what they're doing. So it's
right, and also, I mean, the stuff that's in there would be down in terms of radioactivity, would be down below the level of uranium ore. So down below the level of stuff that's already there naturally in rocks all over the world, we'd have to somehow plan a repository which is less radioactive than all of the natural stuff that's under God knows how many mountains already. I mean, it seems insane that the industry has accepted this impossible challenge, which not only makes the technical feasibility of repositories very, very difficult to do, but it also re-emphasizes the public fears of just how dangerous this stuff is. If you have to somehow safeguard it with hieroglyphics against future civilizations, we probably shouldn't be leaving that legacy.
I mean, they're kept on site right now, and there has never been any issues with that. It's very easy to store safely. I mean, just putting it in water. Water is a great barrier for radiation, and we know that we can do this very easily. So it's just it's shooting an apple with a cannon, basically.
Yeah, I think Tom Blees, who wrote a book called Prescription for the Planet back in the day, which was one of the books that convinced me, said, with a slight tongue-in-cheek, that the best thing to do with nuclear waste would be to drop it in the ocean in big yellow cans with the radioactive symbols on the side, which looks bad. And Greenpeace, of course, had a field day when this was actually done. But I think it's like 2 or 3 meters of water blocks all gamma radiation. So none of it actually gets out. And, it gets covered in sediment and disappears into a trench or something like that. So actually, the optics of this and the technical desirability or feasibility are very, very different things. And the industry's always got the optics wrong, but has focused 100%, I think, on the technical and the engineering. And maybe that's because, what the kinds of people who are involved.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think of the Fukushima wastewater case, that was ridiculous as well. I mean, you can't. There's radiation naturally in seawater, and you can't detect. I mean, it's going to lead so much. It's going to have absolutely no effect on any biological creatures. But it was still like, oh, that's terrible.
This was about tritium, wasn't it, in the water that's been stored in huge quantities in Fukushima. And I think, if I remember rightly, the amount of tritium that was going to be in the water was less than in normal discharges from nuclear power stations all around the world. And yet somehow it was still this enormous, this political furore about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that comes back, of course, to the safety issue, which I mentioned earlier, and that's like the second big objection. Now, obviously, there is a safety case, right? I mean, where nuclear power has gone wrong, you've had hundreds of thousands of people had to be evacuated. You've definitely had health impacts of some sort. Just give us a sense of how you deal with this as a pro-nuclear environmentalist.
So I try to put it into perspective because we know how many people fossil fuels kill per day. There have been huge hydro dam accidents as well. So, I mean, nuclear is still one of the safest options out there for energy production. And the thing is that people think that there's risks to using nuclear, but they forget that there's risks for not using nuclear. So you always have to take that into account. So what if we don't use nuclear? How many people will die then? And we know this because if you prematurely close down a nuclear plant, that has led to more coal and gas, and we know that's going to have consequences like real life health consequences to people. So you have to compare these risks, and when you compare these risks, then it's really obvious that using nuclear is a lot less risky than not using nuclear energy. And usually I explain the thing that like this way, and then people get it like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that there are risks to not using nuclear as well, and those are much bigger. I mean, if you look at, I mean, we know what's going to happen if we go above like 2 Celsius of warming, or we know what's going to happen. We know that the risks are huge compared to the risks of using nuclear.
Yes, I mean, if you look at the stats, I think I can't remember offhand, but the mortality, global burden of mortality from particulates released by coal-fired power stations and probably fossil fuels generally is, it'd be like a Chernobyl every hour or something. But you don't see these people. You don't see a reactor blow up. You don't see the helicopters. You don't see you don't get the sense of emergency because these are deaths which are statistically identified and extrapolated amongst a very, very large population. So it has a different feel to it. Right?
Some people are terrified of airplanes, even though that's the safest form of transportation, but they're not scared to drive a car. So it's a similar thing. Like if the air pollution is there constantly, you kind of get used to it, and then nuclear disaster seems it's worse when it's actually not.
So has the safety case, has it been mitigated? I mean, are the newer generation of reactors safer than the old in a way which is actually meaningful? And if so, do people need to know this?
I don't think they're safer in a way that's very meaningful. I mean, they're safer, but I think there's a point when like you have to say that making this even more safe, it's not going to really do anything. It's going to improve the safety like 0.001 something, but the costs are very high to do that. So I think I think the older reactors are very safe already. So I think that was never the issue. I'm sure there was things that weren't done for the Fukushima reactors, and they were told that they should do this to prevent the disaster happening, and they didn't. So there's definitely some good steps that have been taken. But I don't like to talk about the new reactors as like super safe compared to the old ones, because I would be saying that the old ones were really unsafe, and that's not true. So, I mean, we still have the old reactors in Finland, like the Loviisa ones that we built decades ago, and they have been operating very safely and reliably. So I don't want to, say anything bad about them either.
Okay, what about the cost thing? I mean, you had a new reactor called Olkiluoto, was it, that was built recently?
Yeah, Olkiluoto 3, yeah.
Wasn't cheap, was it?
No, I mean, but it was more expensive to the French taxpayers than it was for us.
That's all right then. No problem there.
Yeah, because the court decided that we as a buyer shouldn't be paying for those extra costs. So for the Finns, it wasn't actually very expensive. But like I said, we stopped building in the 90s thanks to some of the really bad ideas and decisions we had back then. Back then, we thought, for example, that it would be terrible if we would export electricity. And right now, this idea seems ridiculous. Like, wouldn't that be a good thing if we could help our neighboring countries like Estonia, like we're doing now? After Olkiluoto 3 has been finished, we can actually export clean energy and help Estonia out. But back then, that was, people thought that was a bad idea. We shouldn't have too much electricity. So we stopped building these reactors, and then the first one we started building after a long break was the first of a kind, a huge reactor, never been built before. So there's going to be delays. And it's not just nuclear reactors that are suffering from this problem. We had a huge metro train system built in the capital city area in Finland. That was delayed as well, and the costs were much higher than anticipated. Because again, we hadn't been building that. The original metro system, I don't even remember when that was built, but a very long time ago. I mean, so you lose expertise, you lose routine. So when we built several of reactors of the same kind, we did this in Finland, we did this in Sweden, we did this in France, no issues. But when you're taking a break for decades and then you start building a huge one, there's going to be problems. And this is what we're seeing in Europe. So I think it's very solvable. We can see, like in Arab Emirates with Baraka nuclear plants, they didn't have nuclear before, but they were really good at building 4 reactors, same model, and every single one was cheaper than the one before because you learn and you become fast.
They built the whole lot in 12 years to budget and to time, which surprised me. I thought it just wasn't possible, but it's just that it's not possible in the West by the looks of things.
Yeah, because they ordered reactor that had been built before, so they didn't try to do this gigantic project with a new reactor. So we know how to do it, but we haven't done it in Europe and in the Western countries.
I think it's a bit like putting up a tent, in that, if you buy a tent and you have to put it up for the first time, it takes about an hour. You're looking at the instructions, you're trying to figure out where all the poles go and, what goes where and where the pegs are and all of this. And of course, if you're then putting the same tent up 5 times in a row, you'll be able to do it in 10 minutes and then 5 minutes, and you'll have it super quick. And so there's a kind of learning by doing, right? And there seems to be all these different reactors, and there's lots of time in between them. And it seems a very poorly organized sector at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, we know how to fix that. So that's the good news.
How do we fix
know
it?
what we've done wrong, and we know how to fix that.
Do we fix it with SMRs, small modular reactors? Is that the way forward in your view?
I think that's one of the ways forward. I think we shouldn't stop building big reactors either. So I think we can do big reactors and small ones. In Finland, we're considering small ones from the district heating system because we have a district heating system and we're still relying on a lot of burning waste, burning biomass. It's not sustainable. So the utilities have been very frank. They have been saying that if we don't get nuclear for district heating, we're not going to meet our climate goals. There's just not enough clean heat sources to do that without nuclear energy. So SMRs for that, I think, are very good because you don't need very big reactors for the district heating system, and they're going to cost less because they're not producing any electricity. They're just going to produce just heat, so it makes it simpler.
Right. So to get back to our main subject, the bad idea that Greens can't be in favour of nuclear power. Where are we at exactly in Finland now with this? Like, you've said that the Greens in a sort of general way are pro. I still don't believe you. I mean, convince me that the Green Party of Finland right now is pro-nuclear.
Yeah, so a few years ago, we put some positive statements about nuclear energy into a party platform. I mean, this was in the yearly assembly of the Greens. I was there. So when I noticed that the Green Party started to change, they started removing anti-nuclear stuff from their position papers, I thought, now it's a good time to join and just accelerate this change within the Greens. Yeah, a few years ago, there was a new party platform that was voted for in the yearly General Assembly, and it has several positive statements about nuclear. It said that nuclear is a part of a sustainable energy system, that legislation needs to be changed so that SMRs become plausible. So, for example, there have been this limits to how close a nuclear reactor can be to a city, and for a district heating plant, this would be a disaster if it has to be very far away from the city where you actually need the heat. So that was put in the party platform, and all the anti-nuclear stuff is out of the party platform and the position papers of the Greens. So there's really nothing anti-nuclear stuff left in the official stances of the Green Party of Finland.
And what do other Green parties say? I mean, I can't imagine this has influenced the Green Party in Germany or Austria.
I've heard that it's challenging in the EU because we're still part of the Green group in the European Parliament, and there are a lot of Green parties still against nuclear. So I think the agreement now is to agree to disagree on this. But I know that in several other green parties across Europe, there are people, especially young people, who are reconsidering and think that their green party shouldn't be against nuclear anymore. So I've been trying to be very supportive because I know how difficult it is in the beginning to be the one saying that maybe we should change this, because you get attacked and you, like you said, you might lose your friends. They stop talking to you. It's a terrible thing being a pioneer in many occasions. And so I've been trying to offer support from the Science Greens. So I was in the board of the Science Greens last year, and I did some of this international outreach. So I know there are pro-nuclear Greens across Europe, but they just need support.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get to whether if there's something unique about Finland, but also if there's something unique about you. Like, personally, you seem quite brave. I mean, I know this from working with you for many years. You're not very easy to scare. You played American football. You worked with Wolves. Tell us a bit about your life and how you got to where you are.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was an environmentalist since I was a child. So I like Jacques Cousteau. I like Dian Fossey, like the Gorillas in the Mist. Like all those movies really inspired me. I was always very into animals and nature, and I was especially curious about how animals think. So that led me to having a master's degree in animal behavior and studying killer whales, for example, and their behavior, because I was always fascinated how other animals think. And there's just so many similarities to humans. And then we think that we're very unique, but actually we're not. So a lot of the things we do, other animals are also doing. So we're not that unique. We have some unique characteristics, but I mean, animals have feelings and idea and personalities, and that was just very fascinating to me. And I was in the traditional environmental organizations since I was a kid, but I didn't understand why they were so against technologies, like not just nuclear energy but also gene technologies, because I was also a science nerd, and all these technologies just made sense to me, and I saw them as opportunities rather than threats. And I couldn't understand why these people seemed to be so against them. And so that was why I was very happy to find like-minded people in 2015 when the Finnish Eco-Modernist Society was started, and I was asked to be part of that organization, and I became the chair. And I think the reason why I'm not afraid was that I was bullied for, I think, 7 years at least in a row and in school. And I already learned at that age that, I shouldn't care about what people think about me. So I was this outcast, so I didn't feel like I fitted anywhere, because I had these qualities that usually you don't find in one person. So I was, for example, very athletic, but I was also very good at school. I was pro-nuclear, but I was an environmentalist. So I had qualities from different tribes, so I didn't belong to any of them really. And so that's been kind of my life story, just trying to find my tribe. And I finally did at WePlanet, but it it took me several decades.
But before that, didn't you represent your country in a sporting thing?
Yeah, in the American football.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so I played for the national team of Finland. I played in the United States in the professional, semi-professional league. I had 2 World Championship bronze medals as well. So I was in the all-star team of the World Championships. So, and then was the captain of the national team of Finland. And I think sports has taught me a lot about setting goals, being a good teammate, working in a group. It also builds your character. So when you're playing against someone who weighs like 70 kilograms more than you, then after that, you're not afraid of anything. So
not even afraid to go to the Greens and say I'm pro-nuclear.
Yeah, exactly.
And wolves, you work with wolves as well, or studied wolf behavior?
Yeah, so I started doing my PhD at the University of Helsinki, and I did all my courses, and I published one piece of research, but then I had to quit because WePlanet was taking too much of my time. But I was studying the cognition of cats and dogs, and we had some universities collaborating with us who were doing the same cognitive tests with wolves. So I really got interested in wolf behavior as well. And wolves are a very hot topic in Finland. And I've been trying to build bridges. So I've been in podcasts with hunters, for example, because hunters are one of the biggest groups in Finland who are opposing protection of wolves because the wolves eat hunting dogs. So I've been trying to have meaningful discussions about that. And actually, there's a podcast episode tomorrow that's going to be published where one of these wolf podcasts. I'm also discussing nuclear in that podcast, but it's with a Finnish hunter that I know and we've been collaborating with.
This is in Finnish, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, unfortunately, you have to learn Finnish if you want to listen.
I'll be skipping that one. Okay. Just to get back to the nuclear thing, I think you're one of the kind of original instigators of what has now become a global pro-nuclear movement. Tell us where things have got to and what, you think the next steps might be in terms of really turning around the tide of environmentalists and also wider opposition to this technology.
Yeah, so I started to be a pro-nuclear activist when I was 16. So I've been doing this for, 25, 26 years now. Hard to remember your age when you're over 40, you know.
Tell me about it, yeah.
Anyway, so we've come a long way since. So it's been a very difficult journey. I think nothing really happened in the first few decades. I think when people started to realize how urgent climate crisis is right now and that we're going to need everything that we have, it started to change, and it started to change at the same time in many countries. So that's why we were the first ones to start in Finland, but just within a few years, similar organizations started popping up across Europe. And I think the time is right for this kind of pro-nuclear movement. And also outside of WePlanet, we've been collaborating with loads of different groups across the globe. So I think there are a lot of people having the same idea at the same time. And we understood the urgency, and there was a new generation coming who started questioning this very old anti-nuclear stance. And we've seen change happening in the US. So the Democrats are now also supporting nuclear on the federal level. We've seen a lot of change in Europe. Sweden has, canceled their plans to shut down all the nuclear reactors. They're planning to build new ones. Denmark is just showing recent polling that the majority is supporting nuclear. So a lot of European countries are changing their minds about nuclear. Japan, after Fukushima, is now backing the nuclear game. So huge things are happening across the globe. So I'm really hopeful about the future of nuclear energy right now.
Yeah, because this is where I want to sort of end really, is with the sense of whether or not you think we're winning or we're losing, because there's nuclear shutdowns obviously now completed in Germany. There's reactors being shut down in Belgium. The Spanish reactors are still due to be shut down, I think, by 2027. So I don't know whether this is a legacy of old bad ideas which are still playing out today, or whether the anti-nuclear movement or ideology is still sufficiently strong that it's going to stop any kind of nuclear renaissance. I mean, I guess it's your job to be optimistic because you're a movement builder, but try and be realistic about where you think we are now and where we might be going over the next 5 to 10 years.
I think there are a few countries where the anti-nuclearism still has a very strong hold, Germany being one of them. But even in Germany, we can see in the polls that the majority is starting to reconsider. I think the same is going to happen in Spain. There was just a recent march for pro-nuclear march to save the plants. There was 12,000 people. That's quite a lot of people.
Wow, it's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're winning, but we need to keep pushing. And now it's not only up to the organization of the NGOs campaigning for nuclear. Now it's really up for the industry to actually start delivering projects. So it's not enough for the general public to be pro-nuclear. If we don't start building nuclear, we don't see successful projects, then the support is going to start fade away. So now is the time to really deliver on nuclear projects. I think that's the biggest threat, that if we don't start getting reactors up, then we're going to lose the support very quickly.
And just a final shout out for WePlanet, who's obviously supporting us in doing this podcast. What's the plan for sort of movement building on a pro-nuclear level with them?
Yeah, so we have a lot of European countries. Most of our countries are from Europe, but we have 4 African countries, 1 country in Asia. We have Australia. We just started in the US. So I think we're going to continue expanding globally, and we're going to do grassroots mobilization and movement building in the countries that we already have. So I invite everyone who's interested in pro-science, pro-technology, pro-human, environmental movement to get in touch and find your local organization. If you don't have one, then you can contact me and I will help you to start one. But I think that, like I said, the time is right and there's a huge demand for a very positive solution-based environmental movement, and we are the one. So I think we're going to keep growing.
And people find us at WePlanet.org, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and just finally, just because we're about out of time, what's next for you, having helped turn around the Finnish Greens? Are you standing again? Are you standing as a candidate?
Yes, I'm running for the city council elections this spring. So let's see what happens with that. And I really support having a small modular nuclear reactor in my hometown to provide district heating for Joensuu, where I'm from.
So yes, in my backyard.
Yes. So that's going to be one of my election campaign points, for sure.
Well, I think you're the only Green Party candidate I would vote for. I hope there'll be more in years to come because, I don't know, for me, I think the Greens are probably closest to my political sympathies and, in terms of the broad base of what the platform is. But the nuclear issue and the fact, I guess the GMOs as well, they're a real roadblock. I just can't vote for a party which is so profoundly and unscientific and just flat wrong about such an important issue for the future of the climate.
Yeah, and I had that exact problem, but luckily now in Finland you have most of the green candidates are pro-nuclear and pro-gene technologies because we changed that stance just it was a year or two ago as well. So the Greens in Finland are now pro-GMOs and pro-nuclear, and so I'm very proud and happy to be in the Greens in Finland.
Well, I'm proud and happy that you're part of the movement and that you've given inspiration to so many people. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I hope that a lot of people are going to learn from you and take something of your kind of bravery and your refusal to accept an established dogma in this and take it forward in their own countries in whatever way. But for now, Tea Törmänen, if I got that right, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much for listening to Saving the World from Bad Ideas, a We Planet podcast. We Planet's a movement of citizens and scientists dedicated to defending the science and solutions we need to save the world. Please do subscribe and share a nice review. It helps us spread the message. We'd also love to hear your feedback and suggestions at our email, podcast@weplanet.org. Please also join our podcast mailing list and we'll let you know when a new episode drops. Just go to savingtheworldfrombadideas.org or weplanet.org/podcast right now. See you next time.